Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks silently among us, watching, listening, learning. This is the story of a moment that shook the foundations of Western diplomacy and sent a powerful message across Africa and beyond. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Voice of Pan-Africanism and hit the notification bell. Our channel brings you the untold stories of African dignity and sovereignty that mainstream media won't show you. Imagine a room filled with Western diplomats and corporate executives in expensive suits, planning the future of African resources. Now imagine Ibrahim Traoré, the young revolutionary president of Burkina Faso, walking into that same room dressed in simple clothes, completely unrecognized. What happened next would change how the West sees African leadership forever. Ibrahim Traoré is not your typical president. At just 34 years old, this military captain rose to power in Burkina Faso in September 2022, becoming the world's youngest head of state. But his youth hasn't stopped him from standing firmly against neo-colonial influences. Born in Bondoukoui, Burkina Faso, Traoré grew up witnessing the struggles of his people. He saw how foreign powers continued to extract wealth from his homeland while everyday citizens suffered. He watched as Western nations preached democracy while supporting leaders who served foreign interests over their own people. Unlike many African leaders who wear designer suits and travel with large entourages, Traoré is often seen in his military fatigues or simple civilian clothes. He moves among his people, listens to their concerns, and remains connected to their reality. "I don't need a suit to represent my people," he once said. "I need courage and conviction." This philosophy would be put to the ultimate test during a high-stakes economic forum in Switzerland, a gathering where the future of West African resources would be discussed by those who had exploited them for centuries. The World Economic Forum's special session on African development was scheduled for early 2023. Representatives from major Western powers, multinational corporations, and several African nations were invited. The goal, according to the official statement, was to discuss sustainable partnerships for African growth. But Traoré had received intelligence suggesting a different agenda: plans to secure privileged access to Burkina Faso's gold and mineral resources while bypassing the new government's regulations. Instead of sending a formal delegation or declining the invitation, Traoré made an unprecedented decision. If you're finding this story revealing, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to understand the true face of African leadership today. The Grand Hotel Kempinski in Geneva gleamed under the winter sun. Black luxury cars lined the entrance as attendees with security clearances and name badges filed into the conference hall. Security was tight, or so they thought. Among those entering was a young black man in a simple dark blazer over a plain shirt. No expensive watch, no entourage, no security detail. He carried only a leather portfolio with the emblem of Burkina Faso subtly embossed on its cover. The security guards barely glanced at his credentials, a diplomatic pass listing him as Ibrahim T., Special Advisor, Ministry of Resources, Burkina Faso. No one stopped him. No one recognized him. No one realized that the president himself had just walked into their carefully orchestrated meeting. Inside the opulent conference room, crystal chandeliers hung over a massive oval table. Water bottles labeled with the corporate sponsor's logos sat at each place setting. Placards indicated assigned seating. Representatives from Shell, Total, the IMF, the World Bank, and various European governments. The small placard reading, "Burkina Faso, Advisory Delegate," was placed far from the main action, nearly at the end of the table. Ibrahim Traoré quietly took his seat there, nodding politely to those nearby who gave him cursory glances before returning to their pre-meeting conversations. A French executive nearby leaned toward a colleague and whispered, not quietly enough, "I see they've sent some junior person again. Perfect. We can move forward without much resistance on the licensing terms." Traoré didn't react. He simply opened his portfolio and began taking notes. The Swiss moderator called the meeting to order. Welcome to this special consultation on West African resource development. Today we'll be discussing new frameworks for mineral extraction in the region, with special focus on countries experiencing governmental transitions. The British representative spoke first. We must acknowledge the concerning situation in Burkina Faso. The recent military takeover creates significant uncertainty for investors. We propose a special international oversight committee to ensure stability for ongoing and future projects. Around the table, heads nodded. The IMF representative added, any new loans would naturally require certain guarantees and structural adjustments to ensure proper management. For nearly an hour, Traoré sat silently as Western representatives and corporate executives outlined their vision for his country's resources. They spoke of concerns about the new regime, necessary supervision of mining operations, and favorable conditions for continued investment. Not once did anyone ask the advisor from Burkina Faso for his input. Not once did they consider that their plans might face serious opposition. They simply assumed compliance from what they perceived as a minor representative of a poor African nation. Finally, the moderator said, "We have prepared a draft communiqué outlining the principles we've discussed. All delegations will receive a copy for endorsement. We expect to announce this new framework for West African resources within the week." Traoré raised his hand. The moderator seemed surprised but nodded reluctantly. Yes, the delegate from Burkina Faso? Traoré's voice was calm but clear. Before we proceed to any communiqué, I have a few questions. The French executive sighed audibly. Others exchanged glances. By what right, Traoré began, do you determine how my country's resources should be managed? By what authority do you propose oversight committees for a sovereign nation? And most importantly, why do you discuss these plans without proper consultation with the actual government of Burkina Faso? The room fell uncomfortably silent. The British representative spoke first, his tone condescending. Young man, these frameworks are designed to help countries like yours attract investment. Without them, I'm afraid the international community would be hesitant to engage with your current leadership. Traoré nodded slowly. I understand. You need certain guarantees before you feel comfortable doing business with us. He paused. But Burkina Faso also needs guarantees. If you're feeling the tension in this room, imagine how it felt to be there. Hit that like button if you believe African resources should benefit African people first. The American representative leaned forward. And what guarantees would those be, Mr. Traoré? He replied simply. Ibrahim Traoré. There was a moment of confusion before the Swiss moderator's face went pale. The French executive's mouth fell open. Whispers erupted around the table. President Traoré? The moderator stammered. Traoré nodded, his calm demeanor unchanged. Yes, I thought it important to hear directly how the international community discusses my country when they believe we are not in the room. The atmosphere transformed instantly. Security personnel by the doors suddenly stood straighter. The executives, who had been dismissive moments before, now looked deeply uncomfortable. Mr. President, had we known you were attending personally, the British representative began. Traoré raised his hand, stopping him mid-sentence. That is precisely my point. Had you known, this would have been a different meeting with different words. But I wanted to hear your true intentions. He stood up slowly. And I have. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each person present. The guarantees Burkina Faso needs are simple. Respect for our sovereignty, fair compensation for our resources and partnerships, not exploitation. The room remained silent as Traoré continued. You speak of oversight committees and structural adjustments. We speak of building schools and hospitals with the gold that comes from our land. You worry about your investments. We worry about feeding our children. The IMF representative tried to salvage the situation. President Traoré, we have only the best interests of the Burkinabe people at heart. Traoré smiled slightly. Then we can start fresh, with honest negotiations between equals. But the draft communiqué you've prepared? He glanced at the document. That will not be receiving Burkina Faso's endorsement. He closed his portfolio and tucked it under his arm. I will be available tomorrow for proper bilateral discussions with any nation or company that wishes to engage with Burkina Faso as a sovereign equal. Those meetings will be held at our embassy on our terms. With quiet dignity, Ibrahim Traoré walked toward the door. Before exiting, he turned back to the still stunned room. One more thing. Next time you invite an African nation to discuss its future, remember this. We are no longer the Africa you think you know. We are watching, we are listening, and we are ready to take our rightful place at the table. The door closed behind him, leaving a room full of powerful people in stunned silence. If you believe in the new Africa that President Traoré represents, subscribe now and share this video to spread the message of African dignity and sovereignty. News of President Traoré's unexpected appearance and powerful statements spread rapidly. Within hours, video clips recorded by stunned attendees leaked online, showing the moment the young president revealed his identity and delivered his message of sovereignty. African social media erupted in celebration. Hashtags like #Traoré, the Unrecognized, and Why Africa's Watching trended across the continent. Young people in Ouagadougou took to the streets in spontaneous celebrations, waving Burkinabe flags and chanting Traoré's name. The Western reaction was dramatically different. Emergency meetings were called at foreign ministries across Europe. The World Economic Forum issued a hurried statement claiming they had always intended to engage meaningfully with all African stakeholders. But the damage to their credibility was done. Other African leaders began questioning the formats of international economic forums. The president of Mali called publicly for a new economic dialogue based on mutual respect. Zimbabwe's leader referenced Traoré's move as a master class in revealing neo-colonial attitudes. Perhaps most significantly, 3 major mining corporations that had operations in Burkina Faso requested meetings at the Burkinabe embassy the very next day, exactly as Traoré had suggested. The French newspaper Le Monde published a front-page editorial titled, "The Invisible President: How Western Arrogance Was Exposed in Geneva." Even Western publications had to acknowledge the power of what had transpired. When Traoré returned to Ouagadougou, thousands greeted him at the airport. He addressed them briefly. "I went not as your president, but as your witness. I saw how they speak about us when they think we cannot hear. Now we all know, and now we can act with our eyes fully open." Within weeks, Burkina Faso announced a comprehensive review of all foreign mining contracts. Companies would be allowed to continue operations only if they agreed to new terms. Higher taxation, mandatory local employment quotas, and significant infrastructure investments in communities where resources were extracted. 2 Western companies immediately threatened to withdraw. 3 others agreed to the new terms. And China, Russia, and Turkey all submitted proposals for new partnerships under the revised framework. The Geneva incident, as it came to be known, marked a turning point. Other resource-rich African nations began implementing similar reviews of foreign extraction contracts. A new era of resource nationalism was dawning across the continent. At the United Nations General Assembly 3 months later, Traoré received a standing ovation from African, Asian, and Latin American delegations before he even began speaking. His first words at the international podium, "I come to you today fully recognized, representing a nation that will no longer be invisible." If this story moves you, remember that African sovereignty is being fought for every day. Support our channel so we can continue bringing you these powerful stories of resistance and dignity. What happened in Geneva was more than just a diplomatic power move. It represented something deeper, a fundamental shift in how African leadership engages with the international community. For centuries, Africa's resources have been discussed, divided, and exploited in rooms where African voices were either absent or ignored. From the Berlin Conference of 1884, where European powers carved up the continent without a single African representative present, to modern-day economic forums where African delegates are often treated as junior partners at best. Ibrahim Traoré's action broke that pattern in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. By physically placing himself in that room, unrecognized until he chose to be seen, he exposed the continuation of colonial attitudes that persist beneath diplomatic niceties. Dr. Aisha Osori, director of the African Center for Leadership, described the significance. What President Traoré did was pull back the curtain on the theater of international relations. He showed that despite all the talk of partnership and respect, the old attitudes of dismissing African agency remain deeply embedded in how Western powers engage with the continent. This moment connects to other pivotal stands against neo-colonialism, from Thomas Sankara's rejection of foreign aid that came with strings attached, to Patrice Lumumba's demand for true independence for Congo, to more recent assertions of resource sovereignty across the continent. The difference today is technology, the ability for such moments to be shared instantly across a connected Africa, inspiring new generations to demand dignity and respect on the global stage. Young Africans watching leaders like Traoré are learning that sovereignty isn't just about flags and anthems. It's about who benefits from the continent's vast wealth, who makes decisions about its resources, and who shapes the narrative about its future. As one young student in Dakar put it after watching the video from Geneva, "For the first time, I saw them uncomfortable instead of us. I saw them squirm while our president stood tall. That image will stay with me forever." The question now facing the international community is whether they will adapt to this new reality or continue clinging to outdated approaches that treat African nations as junior partners rather than sovereign equals. Because Ibrahim Traoré made one thing abundantly clear in that meeting room in Geneva: Africa is watching, Africa is present, and Africa will no longer be invisible. The story of Ibrahim Traoré walking unrecognized into that Swiss meeting room reminds us of an ancient African proverb: until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. For too long, Africa's story has been told by others, its resources counted as others' wealth, its future planned in others' meeting rooms. But a new chapter is being written by leaders who understand that true independence requires more than flags and borders. It requires courage to walk into spaces designed to exclude you. It requires wisdom to listen before revealing your hand. And it requires dignity to stand firm when the moment of truth arrives. What happened in Geneva that day wasn't just about one president or one country. It was about every African who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. It was about reclaiming the respect that has too often been denied. As we witness this new era of African leadership, remember that the struggle for true sovereignty continues daily across the continent. From boardrooms to classrooms, from mining sites to international forums, the fight for Africa's resources to benefit African people goes on. Ibrahim Traoré showed what is possible when leaders refuse to play by the old rules, when they choose instead to rewrite those rules with boldness and strategic thinking. The question for us is simple. Will we support this new vision of African dignity and self-determination? Will we stand with leaders who demand respect rather than request it? Will we insist that Africa's voice be heard clearly in every discussion about Africa's future? If your answer is yes, then join us on this journey. Subscribe to Voice of Pan-Africanism now. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with everyone you know who cares about justice and dignity. Because the Africa of tomorrow is being shaped today. by leaders who understand that true power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply walks into the room and changes everything. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and join the movement for African dignity and sovereignty. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay proud.